If you think a samurai is just a katana and honor, forget everything you've been sold, because the real story of feudal Japan starts with taxes, fear, and legal power that could kill you for a look. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a system designed to keep people obedient and rivals terrified. Japan fell into total war, and a new world was born split between the battlefield and the shadows. On one side, armor shining. On the other, invisible footsteps in a dark corridor. And in the middle of it all, monks who became armies and turned sacred ground into a battlefield. Before this ends, one question will stick with you. Who was the real predator of feudal Japan? The word samurai meant one who serves, and that didn't begin with glory. It began with enforcement. In the early days, they collected taxes, and it didn't always end with a conversation. Weapons and martial training became routine because peace was fragile and obedience was demanded. The job was simple and brutal: protect the lord, impose order, and crush anything that challenged it. Over time, some accumulated land and wealth, but the nobility still treated them as a step below. And when land disputes exploded, feudal lords hired more warriors, and Japan changed. Those lords were the daimyo, and each one dreamed of becoming the center of the country. Their castles weren't just homes, they were machines of authority, built to watch roads, store rice, and project fear. And rice mattered more than gold, because rice was payroll, stability, and survival. In 1185, clan wars ignited, and one winner turned the key of power in Japan. Minamoto no Yoritomo rises as shogun, and a military dictatorship is born. From that point on, samurai authority grew so much that one wrong move could become a death sentence. Powerful families trained their children early, and war became inheritance, not exception. And those ancient techniques crossed centuries, becoming the roots of modern martial arts. After centuries, the calm breaks, and Japan enters the most violent period in its history. The central government weakens, and the daimyo start fighting again, as if the country were a prize. That chaos becomes the Sengoku Jidai, the era when ambition swallows every law. And this is where the samurai rises to the peak, but not the way you imagine. Here's your first reality check. The main weapon wasn't the katana, it was the bow, and then the spear long before the blade became legend. The katana was the last resort, but it became the symbol because symbols outlive facts. Wearing two swords at the waist separated classes and announced status before a single word. Their armor mixed lacquered wood, silk, and small plates light enough to kill while moving. And some helmets were built to terrify because intimidation wins fights before steel ever touches steel. On the battlefield, recognizing a samurai was like recognizing danger coming straight at you. But when war becomes routine, warriors grow too aggressive and rulers panic. That's when Bushido emerges not as poetry, but as discipline to keep armed men predictable. Justice, courage, honor, duty. Beautiful words for a life that could end in seconds. And the cherry blossom became the symbol because it lasts so little, like the ideal warrior's life. But not every samurai was a saint. Betrayal and ambition showed up with frightening frequency. And if warriors truly lived by honor, why did the system need a code to restrain them in the first place? When Tokugawa wins and enforces a long peace, a problem begins that no one planned for. What do you do with warriors without war? Some lose their masters, others lose their income, and honor becomes a psychological trap. And for many, the honorable exit was ritual death, because losing status felt worse than dying. Others became merchants, police, and some became something more dangerous, ronin, the masterless. Ronin means wave, because they didn't stay anywhere for long, and that frightened cities. A masterless sword is unpredictable, and unpredictability is what governments fear most. And now, inside this enforced calm, there's a shadow world Japan pretended not to see. Because ninja didn't begin as a black outfit. It began as ordinary people collecting secrets in the street. The original term was shinobi, meaning the one who hides, and hiding was a profession. They disguised themselves as merchants, artisans, monks, and sometimes lived for years without being noticed. The best ninja didn't look dangerous. They looked forgettable, and this is where the modern myth hijacks the truth. Most people picture a ninja as a man in pure black, throwing stars, vanishing like magic. But that image is a costume invented by storytelling, not a uniform worn in real streets. A real ninja survived by blending in, because the fastest way to die is to look suspicious. If you were dressed like a shadow, you'd stand out in daylight, in crowds, and at the gates. So the first myth collapses immediately. The strongest disguise was normality. The second myth is that ninja were obsessed with killing. In reality, many missions weren't about assassination at all. They were about information. Who is meeting whom? Which gate is watched? Which guard is tired? Which warehouse is full? A single detail could decide a battle without swinging a sword. That's why the most dangerous ninja weapon wasn't a blade. It was time. Stealing it, buying it, and using it before anyone noticed. And then there's the third myth, that their tools were theatrical. Like every fight had to be spectacular. Real ninja tools were practical and cruel in the quietest way. Not to win a duel, but to create a gap and disappear. Caltrops on a path to slow pursuers. A chain weapon to turn distance into a trap. A quick strike to disable, not a dramatic finish. Smoke didn't defeat enemies. It erased seconds, and seconds were survival. When you strip away the fantasy, what you're left with is something scarier than magic. A professional who turns ordinary life into camouflage. And here's the part people hate admitting. The myth became popular because it feels cleaner than the truth. A mystical assassin is exciting. A human intelligence network is unsettling because it means the danger isn't supernatural. It's invisible, patient, and everywhere. The more political intrigue, the more the ninja was hired, and the more dangerous it became to exist. Castles increased security, samurai guarded gates, and spying became a death lottery. Many were captured and executed, and that forced evolution. More skill, more cunning. They trained to disable fast in tight spaces without duels, only results. Their tools weren't about theatrical kills. They were about control in seconds. Slow a pursuer, blind a guard, create a gap, disappear. A few sharp points on a road could end a chase. A chain weapon could turn distance into a trap. And smoke didn't win fights, it bought time. And here's the twist. When you remove the myth, the real ninja becomes even more frightening. Training started in childhood, building resistance to hunger, sleep, and fear, because the body was a tool. And beyond the body came the mind. Watch without being seen, speak like any region, vanish into routine. They had their own code, different from Bushido, and that made society hate them and need them. During the Sengoku, missions became sabotage. Fires in castles, poison in wells, chaos from the inside. And there were kunoichi women trained to enter as servants and leave with the key to destiny. Two clans rise to fame, Iga and Koga, and the terrain shapes the art of moving unseen. They didn't fight only for contracts, they fought to dominate the entire espionage network. And in the middle of those shadows, one name becomes myth. Hattori Hanzo, the demon of the battlefield. He served Tokugawa and helped rescue his lord's family in an operation that feels like a movie, but was real. And here's the part that flips everything. What happens when the ninja world knows too much about the people in power? When peace arrives, the clans become a problem. Too much information is too much leverage, and leverage frightens rulers. And so a secret organization is born to watch the feudal lords themselves, because no one trusts anyone. But here's the next shock. While ninjas were shadows, monks became armies in broad daylight. Sōhei, the warrior monks, rose to defend temples and ended up fighting politics with blades. Some temples kept standing troops, and faith became a military uniform. And in the mountains came the Yamabushi, figures wrapped in isolation, ritual, and fear. To peasants, they looked like sacred rebels. To daimyo, they looked like an uncontrolled threat. Rivalries between temples grew, and monks began fighting on opposite sides like any army. On the battlefield, you recognized a sōhei by his armor and his prayer beads, an impossible mix of peace and war. And their naginata was devastating because reach and weight can break a platoon's morale. Faith made them fight without retreating, and that intimidated more than any armor. And then a warlord decides to cut the problem at the root with fire and an army. Oda Nobunaga attacks a major temple, and the destruction becomes a message to all Japan. After that, the monks retreat, and the state goes back to monopolizing violence with an iron grip. But Japan isn't done surprising you, because a weapon appears that humiliates the sword. In 1543, firearms arrive, and within years they change what it means to win wars. Japan copies and improves them, and the tanegashima becomes a mass infantry tool. And the myth collapses. Samurai didn't refuse firearms. They learned them because survival rules. War becomes math. Rate of fire, firing lines, rain and powder courage alone doesn't solve it. In decisive battles, the sound isn't steel, it's smoke and impact, and clans fall. So if the sword wasn't the true king of war, why did the katana become the global symbol of the samurai? And now comes the part that turns everything into legend, the names that became monsters and saints at the same time. One of them is Miyamoto Musashi, the man who turned duels into a laboratory of ego and technique. He wins dozens of duels and ends up writing about war like someone writing about the mind. Another is Date Masamune, the one-eyed dragon, mixing brutality and diplomacy like weapons. And then there's the warrior who seems impossible. Tadaketsu, dozens of campaigns and almost no wounds recorded. But the rivalry that defines the era is tiger versus dragon, and all Japan holds its breath. Takeda Shingen and Uesugi Kenshin clash for years, and every meeting feels like the end of the world. In 1561, they nearly face each other, and 1 second decides a fate. They say one of them defended himself with a war fan, and the story becomes myth because myth is memorable. And there's an act that feels impossible in war, sending salt to the enemy so he can survive. Because rivalry can become respect, and respect can pause the slaughter. But peace never lasts, and the death of a leader changes everything in a single night. Over time, Japan moves towards centralization, and the samurai returns to the same dilemma: serve or disappear. In the modern era, opening to the outside world breaks traditions, and many samurai resist as if it were the last war. In the end, the state demands something symbolic and cruel: surrender the swords and accept the end of an era. And those who refuse are punished, because modernity doesn't negotiate with armed nostalgia. But the spirit doesn't die. It recycles into propaganda, into cinema, into memory. And here's what you realize: feudal Japan wasn't a fairy tale of honor. It was a power system. Samurai enforced order, ninja moved information, and monks fought for influence until fire won. And if you think that ended, look at the world today. The methods changed, but the game is the same, because every era has its official warriors and its invisible warriors. Now tell me, would you have survived in feudal Japan, or would you be just another name forgotten in the dust? If you want the next case file, subscribe now and comment which warrior you want me to break down in the next video.